Greetings, exalted ones. My name is Father Sebastian, Master Fangsmith of the Sabretooth Clan, and impresario of the Endless Night Vampire Ball. I welcome you to Vampire World, to my new YouTube channel dedicated to exploring the vampire mythos through the perspective of the Sabretooth Clan. Today, we're going to talk about the top 10 vampire movie picks of all time, dedicated to where the vampire is the protagonist. Number 10 on my list was Queen of the Damned from 2002. This indirect sequel to Interview with the Vampire from 1994 was a horrible sequel. It starred Stuart Townsend as Lestat, who wasn't even blonde, and also Aaliyah as Akasha, who did a pretty good job. But one of the things that I want to make clear about this movie is it sucked. It was horrible. However, the reason why it made the top 10 list was because of the soundtrack. That soundtrack, rock and roll, it's alive, it's very invigorating, and it's awesome for a dance floor. We've used the entire soundtrack on the Vampire Top 250 Songs of Endless Night Vampire Ball. So when you look at it, Queen of the Damned, forget the movie. Look at the soundtrack. Number 9 on my top 10 vampire modern movies of all time is Let the Right One In from 2008. It's a Swedish movie from the perspective of a vampire child. Now, it's a relationship between a young boy and a girl, and the girl is the vampire, and she's super powerful, and she falls in love and wants to make a companion of the little boy. Kind of a reflection of The Hunger, but forget the American version. It happened in Colorado, it was a remake, it was a horrible movie. I really recommend this film. It's an awesome film, it gives you a unique perspective of vampires, and it's from an original point of view. Number 8 on my list is The Hunger from 1983, directed by Tony Scott, starring Catherine Deneuve and my favorite David Bowie. Now, what's great about this movie is that it really introduced vampires as a protagonist. And what was really cool was the bladed ankh that they had in the movie. But the cultural effects have been fantastic. That bladed ankh has encouraged Sabretooth to make the legacy ankh. This is our own version, but that bladed ankh has become the symbol of the vampire culture. Now, it also introduced Bauhaus to the world as a major gothic band. With the star-studded cast, it became one of the most influential vampire movies of all time. Number 7 on my list is What We Do in the Shadows. Now, this 2013 film has ravaged through the vampire culture. Many vampires going, "Oh my God, it's a horrible movie!" But many people who actually have a sense of humor think it's an awesome film. It actually delves into vampire culture, and there's about 3 vampires, actually a 4th living in the basement named Peter, who are actually flatmates. And it shows the interactions of vampires as the main characters. They're the protagonists in the film. So I highly recommend this film. It's number 7 on my list, and it just allows us not to take ourselves too seriously. Number 6 on my list is Underworld from 2003, starring Kate Beckinsale. Now, this movie detailed the battle between the Lycan werewolves and the vampire covens of North America. Kate Beckinsale was a blade hunter of sorts where she would go out and kill Lycans, and there was actually a situation where there was a hybrid between the two. Now, this storyline actually comes predominantly from the Vampire the Masquerade vampire role-playing game and Werewolf the Apocalypse. White Wolf, the publisher of Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse, actually sued the producers of the movie for stealing their idea. Was it a publicity stunt? I'm not sure. But one of the things that this movie did leave a legacy is that werewolves and vampires are in an eternal war. And this has actually affected the modern vampire culture. Werewolves and vampires are friends. I hang out with many werewolves, especially at the Endless Night Vampire Ball, and a lot of them even do security for our events. So we do have a great time with werewolves, and do not think that there is some rivalry between vampires and werewolves in the real world. Number 5 on my list is 1998's Blade, starring Stephen Dorff as Deacon Frost the villain, who was freaking awesome, and Wesley Snipes as Blade the vampire hunter, the Dampiri, the half vampire daywalker. Now, this movie was very, very interesting for vampire culture because it introduced a couple things. First is the techno rave in the beginning, with Tracy Lords being a vampire bringing this victim into a meat locker and everybody raising their hands for the blood to come down. The second thing that it introduced was a vampire language, a vampire religion of vampire culture. These two effects have left a very big impression on the vampire society and the vampire world since then, and I'm very excited to see that Blade still holds up as one of the top 10 vampire movies. Number 4 on my top modern vampire movies of all time is the 1987 classic Lost Boys, directed by Joel Schumacher and starring Kiefer Sutherland. There was a couple of elements of this that brought it into the vampire consciousness, into the vampire world. First of all, it was a fun movie, but it also took itself seriously as a horror movie. It was like Surfer Nazis from Mars takes over a beach meets Jim Morrison. The soundtrack was phenomenal. Absolutely awesome. When People Are Strange for Jim Morrison came out, I was in love with the movie, and it introduced me to The Doors and led me to Paris. But one of the great things about the film that I really loved was it had a sense of humor. One of the iconic things from Lost Boys is the fangs. The fangs were basically awesome because they were very predatory and extremely sexy at the same time. I love that iconic picture of Kiefer Sutherland with his hair blowing in the air and the light on his face and the darkness with the red and yellow contact lenses and the long Lost Boys style fangs. Really was the first time that in my experience in the vampire world that vampires had really cool fangs. They weren't these like giant long like snarling fangs, but they were really sexy. And when you look at that image, you really go, I want fangs. So that has been a really big impact on the Sabretooth clan. And a lot of the styles that we have, one of them is called Losts in honor of Lost Boys. So one of the best parts of the Lost Boys is not just the soundtrack, not just the comedy, not just the fun, not just the serious horror movie, but it also had amazing fangs. Number 3 on my list is Only Lovers Left Alive from 2013. This modern vampire movie with Tim Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton was an amazing film. It was really romantic. It was a little bit steampunk. It was also rock and roll. It reminds me a little bit of The Hunger from 1982. But what was most important was the romance between the two characters. It was very reminiscent of David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve's romance from The Hunger. It really was a modern interpretation. However, it really put the vampires as protagonists and major characters in the film. Now, it was just the personality of the characters that really left an impact. And this has become an iconic movie of vampire culture. Number 2 on my list of the top vampire modern movies of all time is, of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992. This movie, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Gary Oldman as Dracula, was phenomenal. The romance between Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman was perfectly executed. Through oceans of time, I have searched for you, and the little bit of absinthe that it interjected into vampire culture has a lasting effect. The cinematography was phenomenal. The soundtrack was amazing. 2 major effects that this movie had on the vampire mythos and the vampire world was, first, it was a romance story. Dracula was originally written to be a plague coming from the eastern countries into London, and the romance was really a wonderful addition. It also was the first time in major movie history that Dracula and Vlad Tepes, the original Dracula from historical Romania, were connected. This movie is a phenomenal film and is highly advised for all vampire lovers. And finally, number 1 on my list, Interview with the Vampire from 1994. Directed by Neil Jordan and written by Anne Rice, the Queen of the Damned herself. Revolutionized the vampire spirit right after Bram Stoker came out. This movie had an A-list cast of Tom Cruise as Lestat, Kirsten Dunst as Claudia, Antonio Banderas as Armand, and of course Louis, played by Brad Pitt. Oh, Brad Pitt. The cultural impact on the vampire world for this film has been absolutely stunning. I got to meet Kirsten Dunst in 1995 at the Memnoch Ball in the very dress she died in the movie. It was a phenomenal film. Now, there was a lot of controversy about Tom Cruise playing Lestat, you know, a short American hero playing a 6-foot tall, beautiful French guy. However, he did a good job, and Anne Rice was very, very nervous about it, and then it finally came out and she was pleased. This movie had a couple things that were very interesting for the vampire world. First of all, they had amazing fangs. They had the serrated long 3 sets of fangs on each side that instead of clicking down like in old movies, what they would do is they would grow like a phallic symbol of sorts, and they would grow as the vampire got hungry. These fangs were created by the Winston Special Effects Company, and the contact lenses were absolutely amazing. The makeup was great. They would actually turn the actors upside down and trace their veins and put a translucent film over them. It was really beautiful. Now, another effect that the movie had beyond the fangs and the makeup was the contact lenses. They were almost reflective, and they actually changed color throughout the film. If you look at them, they're really a strong effect. Now, Interview with the Vampire has left a lasting effect on us because the soundtrack was phenomenal. It was classical through the entire movie, and then finally in the last scene, it went to rock and roll with Sympathy for the Devil by Guns N' Roses, leading into the hint of the vampire Lestat, the sequel to the book Interview with the Vampire. Sadly, it was never made, and the Vampire Chronicles in that format were never finished. We do have hope in the future for Anne Rice's vampires to come to the big screen in the series, kind of how they did Harry Potter with 8 films. We don't know what's going to happen, but Universal Pictures bought the rights to Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. So of course, Interview with the Vampire is my top vampire movie of all time. I'm Father Sebastian, and thank you for watching our YouTube channel, Vampire World. Please subscribe below and support our channel by sharing our videos and letting your friends know about our project. Our mission is to challenge and inspire your views about the modern vampire mythology, and we're here to answer any of your questions, and welcome to our new community, Vampire World.